Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Karen Abcarians. Today we are here to talk about activism. Activism is defined as the action of using campaigning to bring about political or social change. According to the 2017 Millennial Impact Report, since the last election, 42% of millennials have posted or shared content on a social media platform in support of protest topics. 40% have signed petitions, whether online or in person. 29% have participated in marches, rallies, or demonstrations. We went to the International Women's March and spoke to some activists about why they march.
I think activism is not only important in this day and age, it is our imperative to be rebels, to be resisting, to put names and faces to a movement that needs to be revolutionized. We live under such tight patriarchy and such closed systems that hurt everyone.
I think it's important for us as people to stand up together and fight against fascism and all that's wrong.
This week, over 3,000 walkouts in support of gun control measures were set to take place. In preparation for this national school walkout, #Enough, the event got a lot of love on social media from the Women's March, Youth Empower, and other supporters. Activists say it's important to use all platforms to educate and speak up for those who cannot.
It makes me to see how many people don't have faith that they can make change. It's something that I've always thought I was capable of and people were capable of, you know? I mean, I always just look back at people like Dr. King and, you know, he believed he could make a change and he got people on board. So we just wanted to be optimistic in that sense of if we do something, then it's possible. And I think that most of the kids at CSUN are, you know, on board with us.
People seem to be gaining courage to talk about topics like gun violence, immigration, sexual harassment, and more. The question is, why now? On Point's Jessica Dunn has more on the story.
Thank you, Karen. I'd like to thank our guests for being here today. We have Maria Collis from the San Fernando Valley chapter of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence. And we have Amanda McRaven, a communication studies professor here at CSUN. She teaches social justice performance. I'd like to just jump right in, if it's okay with you ladies. Is President Trump triggering a new era of activism? Let's go ahead and start with you, Professor McRaven.
Yes, 1,000%. When you have something to push against, you fight harder. And I think we were under the delusion in this country that for the last 8 years we had a black president, and so we were good. And so I think the Trump presidency, not that I would wish it on anyone, but I do think it has unearthed things that really needed to be talked about, that we can't delude ourselves anymore into thinking we're okay. So yeah, for sure. Maria, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think we were all, yeah, we thought everybody was coming along in this movement towards greater acceptance of diversity and civil everything, right? But we weren't. There were a lot of people that didn't feel they were represented, and it was a very big wake-up call for those of us that are liberals and progressives.
Speaking of representation, do you think with the right engagement strategies that young adults can be the future of social activism?
Who else? Absolutely. Young people are the future.
And Professor McRaven, would you like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yes, in general, young people are always the ones to lead the way. And B, the millennial generation is a really different place. And then the Zennials, I guess they're called, from my generation, which is Gen X, that we were still sort of at the edge of a complacency that came for our parents of everything's great, we're the greatest place in the world, you're going to go to college, you're going to get a job, everything's going to be fine. I think millennials are the first generation to be like, wait a minute, the world isn't actually working that way. And so I think they are really primed to not only engage with the rigor and the vigor of youth, but also have a unique perspective on what America is that my generation didn't necessarily have. So I'm incredibly heartened.
So with more youth engaging and there being increased activism, do you think that will relate to a substantial political change?
I do. I think, just referencing your first question, the youth are galvanized in a way. So I hope, but I also do think that, I mean, they're today in the walkout, they're signing teenagers up to vote, which is awesome. Like, that hasn't happened before, teenagers signing up teenagers. So that's really exciting to me. So I think we are motivating the young to do actual political action, which means voting.
Yeah. And Maria, how do you become more effective as an activist on critically important issues?
Oh, well, the most important thing you can do is, if you're old enough to vote, register to vote, and vote for candidates that support the things that you support, and educate yourself so that you know who they are. And and following along that line of voting, let your legislators know what issues are important to you. I think that's first and foremost. And then, you know, the information is the most important thing, is your most important weapon. Find out what's going on. Find out who's doing what. Find out who is already doing what you're interested in, and join them. Something we've seen in this past year that's been amazing is just the numbers of people showing up who have never been politically active before. So I think speak with your vote, and speak with your presence, and however you make that presence known, social media, showing up at rallies, writing and calling Congress.
And Professor McRaven, how do you believe it's more important to become critically active on these issues?
Use your voice. Vote, but use your voice every day. I think social media is an amazing tool that this generation has at their disposal to disseminate information democratically. Information is now in the hands of us until they do the net neutrality legislation. But let's say, if that doesn't happen, we get to control what goes out. And that's an awesome power to be used. And so use your voice every day.
Well, what do you think, besides maybe not using your voice, keeps that change from happening?
Complacency. Just deciding that everybody else has your back, that the government has your back, that everything's taken care of, that we're okay, that you don't have to rock the boat, that you just accept, oh, you keep raising my tuition, or oh, it's hard to get a doctor on my insurance. Okay, I guess that's just the way it is. Nothing has to be just the way. There is no just the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have all. I think one of the fundamental principles of our people who live, of our government, of the way we feel about our government, is that they have our back, that they have our best interests at heart, and I think what young people are realizing now, and to me it's very I was a child during the 60s, and it reminds me so much of the 60s, and that's why in the depths of my despair, I've been so encouraged, because I remember they said we couldn't do so many things in the 60s, and it's only as good as the people in there. It's only as good as the people we elect to the government. And there is something called the status quo, and there's something called protecting your turf and protecting your job, and catering to the people that helped you get elected so that you can be reelected. And that is, they say power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Unfortunately, that happens, and it can happen to almost anyone. So you have to constantly keep your elected officials accountable for what they're doing, and that's when you talk about complacency. You cannot think. I mean, I think this is part of what happened to us in the 8 wonderful years that we had Barack Obama as president. We thought, finally, we made it. We're okay now. We're on the right track. It's okay. And then Trump was elected, and it was suddenly, we're not. We can't sit back.
And I will say, add to that too, I've noticed as a professor that as much as not to contradict what I said earlier, that I do believe this generation really sees the structures more, but they are also the generation of No Child Left Behind, where they were raised to check boxes and say yes and have the right answer. What's the right answer? What's the wrong answer? Classes I teach, I often have to break those boundaries down and say there is no right or wrong answer. It's what you believe in. So I think there is a conditioning of complacency that that does need to be broken through. That this generation does need to say, okay, I don't have to do what the people in charge tell me that I have to do. Which is awesome.
How easily do you think people's beliefs can be persuaded?
It depends on how you're framing your argument and where you are hitting your audience. Quick story, a friend of mine runs a restorative social justice program, and she was working with a group of girls, incarcerated youth in the Santa Clarita area, and brought Congress people, local representatives, to come see their performances. One of the representatives, who was incredibly moved by this performance, astonished by what he saw, these young women telling their stories, said to them, "I'm from this district and I didn't even know we had a jail here." And so it's like, wait, what? I mean, that's inconceivable. But when we find the way, so that guy, an older Caucasian gentleman, needed to be brought into a room with young Latina women and hear their stories face to face and not be able to look away. So I totally forgetting your original question, but it's something to do with how you frame your argument. And recognizing, and this is what I teach. How to change people's opinions. You have to know your audience, and you have to know what's going to affect that audience. Mm-hmm. And I can do the same performance for this audience, and this audience. But how I approach the performance, how I frame it, has to be different. I mean, a protest performance, depending on what's going to affect them most strongly.
Yeah, I think that's really astute. Something that we've been thinking about more and more is that we have to reach out to people's humanity, person to person, and just try to move away from the us and them thinking. Find the common ground, find the common humanity,
absolutely,
and begin there. You know, I'm a mom, you're a mom.
Right.
You know.
And it's as simple and as complex as getting in a room and listening to people's stories.
Yep.
This is why we can draw lines, because we don't see each other. We don't listen, and we don't actually see each other. We don't see what we have in common. We only see what we have that's different, and it's a mess. And if we just listened,
and again, I think this is what the last election taught us is we're not listening.
Yeah.
And speaking of listening, I know you're here to represent the Brady campaign. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Brady campaign for people at home who don't quite know exactly what it is?
Sure. The Brady campaign is, from its roots, probably the oldest organization dealing with gun laws and gun control. And it started as handgun control back in the 70s. And then Jim Brady, who was press secretary to Ronald Reagan, was shot and partially paralyzed as the result of an assassination attempt on the president. And he and his wife, who were already activists, they started the Brady campaign to institute background checks for people who wanted to buy guns. And it grew from there. And then in 1999, there was an attack on the Jewish Community Center in Northridge, right here in Northridge, and a local woman, Donna Dees Thomas's, organized the Million Mom March as a response to that. So it was born here. Mm-hmm. And over time, I think it was in 2001, the Million Mom March decided to join with the Brady campaign to be stronger together. Mm-hmm. And so we've been working for common sense gun laws since the 80s, and here locally since 1999. Was that the answer to the question?
Yeah, that's totally fine. And I know that from some research from the Brady campaign and the website and everything, that 100,000 people are victims of gun violence every year, and that the campaign is trying to cut that gun violence related issues in half by 2025. Can you explain to us Brady's solution on how they're going to do that?
Sure. We have a 3-point program, and I'm just going to check my notes to make sure I don't gaffe on that. Right. Expanding background checks, banning assault weapons, and what we call the extreme risk protective order, which is a way of getting guns out of the hands of people that are known to be at risk for violence. These 3 laws, expanded background, universal background checks, banning of assault weapons, and extreme risk protective orders, these are already law in California. We're trying to get these laws passed at the nationwide level, at the federal level. And we have seen the result in California. We have seen that we have much lower rate of gun death in California than in other comparable states. We know these laws work. We know that if we can get these things happening at the federal level, that we can meet that goal.
And speaking of more solutions on how to prevent gun violence, I know President Trump said he's very serious about trying to, prevent gun violence as well. So what steps do you think he has to take to reach that goal?
I think he should shut up.
A brain transplant.
I'm sorry, because when he met with the students from Parkland and other people for whom this issue is very close to home a couple of weeks ago, actually it was almost immediately after the shooting. It was like within a week, right? He was all about banning assault weapons, at least raising the age that you could buy an assault weapon to 21. He was for banning bump stocks. You can go back, I'm sure, and find the list of things he was in favor of. And as of a couple of days ago, he's completely reversed himself on all of these things. Probably doesn't have anything to do with the fact that he had a meeting with some people from the NRA last week.
We have to get there.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, he should just friggin' shut up.
Yeah, like speaking of that, I was going to talk about like the juxtaposition, because during his campaign, I mean, the NRA also, supported him, and Trump, from my research, has been very supportive in the Second Amendment, and it's just very interesting to see now what he's saying about gun violence versus.
Yeah.
I don't think he ultimately cares.
No. It's not a principle.
It's not a principle. I don't know what his principles are, but I think he's got to, for optics, listen to families. But we got to take the power out of the NRA's hands somehow.
Can I say something about the Second Amendment since you brought it up?
Sure.
Nothing that the Brady campaign or any of the other related organizations, Women Against Gun Violence, Sandy Hook Promise, any of these organizations, and in fact the people behind them or the people that are starting to show up, none of us is challenging the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. The Second Amendment, and specifically in the Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who is a conservative justice who wrote the decision, he wrote the explanation of the Supreme Court's decision in the Heller case, which was the one that said that the Second Amendment supports an individual's right to own guns. He said, there is nothing in the Second Amendment that says you cannot limit and regulate that right. Mm-hmm. It is not, the Second Amendment does not say any gun, anywhere, anytime. He emphasized the importance of regulation in that decision. So we're not anti-Second Amendment, and people, that it's a specious argument. It's, excuse the expression, fake news to say that we're against the Second Amendment.
So if there's more activism going on currently, why are people more willing to join versus starting it themselves? More kind of like strength in numbers?
Critical mass. When you know, it's like the Me Too movement. When you know you're going to be safe because there's a support network, you'll speak up.
Yeah.
That's why we have white women in Hollywood now able to speak up, because they feel like they've got critical mass. We don't have all the black women in Hollywood speaking up yet because they don't have the same safety nets, but we'll get there. But when you feel like you will be supported, again, going back to, I think it has to do with our culture of the dissemination of information right now through social media, where you can know that people agree with you and believe in you no matter where they are in the world. You feel empowered to speak up. Until you know you have allies, I think, again, these structures we were talking about are too scary. Well, I don't have any power, that guy has the power. When you realize that power doesn't have to be a triangle. We call it power with instead of power over. When you look at Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is taking the power structure from one person in charge and everybody supporting that power structure to taking power to a horizontal plane.
So speaking of that, what does it take to be considered an activist? Since it's not technically that one person, but more of a mass, so what does it take to be considered that?
I think it's personal for everyone.
I was going to say, I think you can
Yeah.
define yourself as an activist.
Yeah.
I mean, it's how you look upon yourself.
Though I will say, I think it's not enough to just post things on social media. You have to be doing some sort of concrete action. But I think the concrete action is different for everybody.
Right.
Whether you're signing petitions or marching or feeding the homeless on Monday nights.
Exactly. I think, to be an activist, I guess it means, it's an interesting question, but I guess it means there's something that you're doing in your daily life that's a reflection of your values.
Yeah, a verb. It's a verb.
Yes, that's
absolutely.
active. Yeah,
absolutely.
So if you define yourself, that to me that means you kind of are doing your own research and things like that. So do you think activism is considered ignorance if someone isn't familiar with both sides of an issue? Maria?
Well, ignorance is ignorance. Any human being, whether they're an activist or not, if you're going to live in the world, you want to learn as much as you can, right? You're going to start with what's most important to you. And I think, if you're going to go out and march in the streets, I'm not sure you have to understand. I think that's the part of the problem, is we don't understand the other person's point of view. But I do think we have to find out what is at stake for the other side, what's motivating them,
That's great.
what they need.
Yeah.
Would you like to add anything, Professor?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's showing up. Allyship. We all need to be engaged in allyship, especially if we're white folks. We don't, and I love the way you frame that. We don't necessarily have to understand, but we have to say, I'm with you. I'm with you, and I'll learn. And we also don't want to go around asking everyone to explain it to us. That's not other people's work, that's our work to try to understand. But I think you shouldn't hold back from activism just because you may not understand the entire other side of the story. It's a reflexive thing. You get out there and you start to understand. And I don't think you should feel like you have imposter syndrome if you suddenly start marching.
No, I mean, I'm thinking about this whole thing about immigration now. It's like, look, I know, as a human being, I know it is fundamentally wrong to separate a mother and child, period. I don't need to be a political expert. I don't, and that's something, that's another way that they wield power over us by saying, and I was absolutely furious when I heard people responding to the students from Parkland in this way. You don't understand these issues, they're complex. Well, I call BS on that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As we're winding down here, I have one last question for you both. How does social justice activism alleviate some forms of suffering?
Yes, all of it, always. We suffer when we don't feel like we have a voice, when we don't feel like we know how to understand what we're going through. So again, and I'm a storyteller and a professor of storytelling, And so I will always come back to when we see that other people have our same story, we suffer less. Oh, we're in this together, and we can fix it together. So it's huge. Activism is huge, and to be shown it by, like, we are being shown by teenagers in Florida, but teenagers all over the country today, and to that nobody's, what you just said, nobody's story is more valuable than anybody else's story. That we all have something to contribute and to share and to teach each other. I learn every day in my classroom. I don't understand everything about what it means to grow up in this part of the country and go to Northridge and be a millennial. So they get to teach me, and my students will also often be like, what do you mean we're the teachers? I'm like, yes, we all have something to teach each other. I don't have all the power in the room. I don't have all the information in the room. I'm just a guide. So, yeah, we absolutely need to be empowered by each other to suffer less.
On that note, I want to thank you both so much for being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Come on, let's go.
Just a minute, I gotta finish this.
Wait, you're gonna post those pictures of Mary?
Yep. She thinks she's so hot.
But her mom and dad will see them. Her grandmother, her little sister, everyone she knows, it's gonna kill her.
Who cares? Just a couple of pictures. It's no big deal.
No big deal? Don't. This has gotta stop.
Green hat. Red hat. Oops. Red shirt. Blue shirt. Yellow shirt. Oops. Yellow pants. Red pants. Green pants. Oops.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on social media at CSUN On Point. You can hear us on KCSN 88.5 FM on Sunday mornings at 5:30. You can watch us on Santa Clarita Valley Television on Sundays at 5 and on LA 36 at 9:30 on Thursday nights. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Karen Abcarians.